Hey, everybody, welcome into episode 152 of the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. My guest on the show today is Rich Horwath. Now, Rich, if you don't know him, I'll tell you this, man. He is the founder and the CEO of the Strategic Thinking Institute, where he works as a strategy facilitator and a coach to executive leadership teams. Rich is a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of 8 books on strategic thinking. His most recent book was Strategic: The Skill to Set Direction, Create Advantage, and Achieve Executive Excellence, was selected by Inc. magazine as a top 4 must-read book for 2024. He has appeared on every major network, providing expert commentary on business strategy, and his work has been published in Fast Company, Forbes, and the Harvard Business Review. Rich is the former chief strategy officer and professor of strategy at the graduate level. He's helped more than 250,000 leaders develop their strategic thinking and planning abilities over the last couple of decades. And his lifelong goal is to teach the world to be strategic. Rich and I sat down and had a really great conversation about how leaders can take intentional steps so that they are owning their time, so that they are leading with purpose, and so that they truly are being strategic leaders. Folks, this is a fantastic conversation. Rich is a fantastic guy. His book is an incredible read. You're going to love this conversation, folks, and you're going to get the whole thing right after this.
I was thinking the other day as I was wrapping up the in-person visits that I've been doing with all the leaders that I've been supporting over the course of this last year about that first year for me as a building level principal. Moving from the assistant principal role into the principal role doesn't seem like a big jump, but it really truly is. When you are the one who has to run the organization, it can be a bit of a daunting task. And obviously, for those of you who are regular listeners to the show, you know that I struggled that first year. It took me a good year and a half, probably, plus the addition of a leadership coach to help me figure it out. The biggest piece I think I had to learn was really about being more of a systems thinker, a strategic thinker, and a tactical thinker, as opposed to somebody who simply responded, somebody who was basically fighting fires. That movement from firefighter to leader, I talk about it all the time. I support people with it all the time. But that's going to kind of set the table for our conversation today here on the podcast. My guest is Rich Horwath. He's the author of an incredible book titled Strategic. And we're going to talk about strategy. We're going to talk about being tactical in your leadership. We'll talk about leadership philosophy, all kinds of great stuff. But before we get to that, Rich, just welcome into the show.
Darrin, thanks a lot. It's great to be with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for this conversation. And, certainly you and I have had a chance to connect before, and we've talked about some of this stuff. So I'm just really raring to go and ready to jump into this. So just really quick, let's maybe kind of orient our leaders a little bit to who Rich Horwath is so they know where you're coming from, what you're all about, and then let's just dive in.
Sounds great. So I was a leader about 35 years ago, so really dating myself in the marketing world. So I worked for a marketing company and was writing strategic plans and managed about 45, 50 people at the time who were also writing strategic plans. And it was interesting. I had an epiphany. I was leading a strategic planning session. So anybody that's been involved in that knows it's typically a 2-day, 3-day session. And we were having coffee at one of the breaks, and one of the managers came up to me and said, Rich, I just had my performance review, and my leader said I'm too tactical. I need to be a little bit more strategic. I'm good tactically, but I need to be more strategic. How do I do that? And again, Darrin, this was about 30, 35 years ago. So there weren't a lot of books on being strategic. There was stuff on, corporate strategy and nonprofit strategy, but not really anything for the individual person. So that was my light bulb moment that said, hey, if I could develop a roadmap to help people be both tactical and strategic, that might be something of value. So started doing research, and then a few years later started my own company and started writing articles and then working with leaders in both the for-profit and nonprofit area to help them be strategic. So really a lot of my life's work has been that passion of teaching people how to think, how to plan, and how to act strategically day in and day out.
So I'm going to ask a question that I think a lot of people are curious about, because for some it may be, well, that seems like it's just semantics, the difference between being tactical and being strategic. Go a little deeper for us there, and maybe, I guess, give us a good baseline from which to work.
Yeah. So one of the things that's important for any of the leaders out there, so whether you're at the superintendent level, or the building level as a principal, you've got to be able to answer two questions. What are we trying to achieve and how are we going to do it? So that's really going to be the two core foundational questions for any plan that you're developing. What are we trying to achieve? How are we going to do it? So typically we've heard the terms goals and objectives. That answers the first question. What are we trying to achieve? The goal is generally what you're trying to achieve. The objective is more specific, usually has a time frame on it. Strategy and tactics then, Darrin, to your point, and it's a great question. Strategy is really how generally are you going to get there? So let's say the goal is to get to the top of the mountain. The objective is we're going to climb 3,000 feet each day for 3 days till we get to that 9,000 foot summit. So that's what we're trying to do. Strategy then is how are we going to get to the top? Can we go straight up? Do we need to zigzag? Do we need to go around the other side? How generally can we get to our goal? And then the tactics are going to be really those specific, tangible, operational things that are going to help us reach our goal. So in this case, maybe we need pickaxes, hiking boots, maybe we need ropes, maybe we need a boat to go around the other side. So those specific, tangible things. So, to your point, we see people a lot of times be successful tactically early in their career. So operationally, they're able to get things done. They're able to get things checked off the to-do list, and they're efficient that way. Strategy, though, is asking us to elevate our thinking a little bit to as we hear oftentimes, that big picture. So when we're thinking strategically, as you pointed out earlier, we're thinking about the whole system that's involved. So we're thinking about all the people involved. We're talking about all of the customers or the audiences, in school cases, obviously the teachers that we have, the faculty, the students, advisory boards, and those types of folks. So we're not just looking at one little piece of the pie, we're looking at the whole pie. So again, I think for a lot of leaders out there, going from tactical to strategic is really about going from doing the operational part well to really seeing what's the big picture here and where do I want to lead this team, not just tomorrow, but a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now.
Yeah, I think that's just so well said. I've referred to it as that kind of that balcony level leadership where now I'm beginning to see the entire picture as opposed to just being down in the weeds, the day-to-day grind, which really is more of the management side as opposed to, that leadership perspective. What are some pieces that you would tell leaders, or that you do tell leaders, that help them avoid maybe some of the most common mistakes that you see? And maybe we should even do this. Maybe we should label a few of the most common mistakes you see leaders make when it comes to being strategic, and then how do you help them through that?
Yeah, well, you beautifully articulated a couple of them really early in our conversation. You talked about the firefighting. That's probably one of the biggest ones, the firefighting and the reactivity. So oftentimes as leaders, we feel like we're doing our job if we're responding to every fire. We're trying to put things out. We're trying to be hyper reactive to everything that's going on. But as you know, Darrin, the reality is a good leader is going to, and I love the way you put that, to be on that balcony. Sometimes we've got to get on that balcony mentally and see everything that's going on. So when a fire or an issue comes to our attention, we don't want to just immediately respond to it. We want to think about the big picture. So we want to think about, okay, here's the fire, but here are the other 5 things, priorities, let's call them, that we're working on as a team. do these 5 things outweigh the importance of this fire that just came up? So the first thing we should always do as a leader is just either vocally or to ourselves say, Let's stop and think about this for a moment. What's the real priority here?" And so if we do that, oftentimes I think we can say, this isn't a priority. It's urgent, but it's not really important to my team, to the folks that I'm leading. So I think that's probably the biggest issue that I see is the reactivity to fire drills is probably the main one.
Yeah, I think you said that really, really well. And I mean, you're mentally, I'm back in that first year as a building principal, running from fire to fire. And so many of the leaders that I work with now, it's that same thing. And I'm curious your take on this statement. I'll work my way to the statement. I think oftentimes leaders will, like you said, think they have to, solve everybody's problems. They have to be that person who just takes care of it all, right? I call that Superman syndrome, where, I just, I've got to be everything to everybody, right? But I think sometimes too, leaders, I was on a call earlier today with one of the leaders that I'm supporting who, in reflecting on her first full year as a building principal, shared that she has to be better at letting people do their job. And by that, she meant I can't continue to take things off their plate because I think I'm helping them when in reality I'm taking away parts of their job. I said I'd work my way to the question. So I'm going to keep trying to do that because I'm struggling. What I really want to get into is just exactly that piece where you go from being a manager, which is I'll take care of it. I've got this. I'll solve that. I'm the smartest person in the room, blah, blah, blah. To I'm going to let my people not only do their job, but have the autonomy, give them some space, be the coach, be the one who's there to support. What are some steps that you guide, especially early career leaders, to actually get to that place?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail right on the head there, Darrin. That's one struggle that leaders, even more experienced leaders, have trouble at sometimes. And the motto I share with them is lead at your level, because as you just articulated, if we're not leading at our level and we're dipping down, and to your point with your example, we think we're helping someone out, but really what we're doing is we're not enabling them to develop their skills and to develop their leadership. So we're actually being a little bit selfish in that we're taking something on, and maybe we're good at doing it. Maybe we can do it faster and more effectively. But at the end of the day, if they're going to develop their skill sets, then we need to allow them to do that as well. So one of the things I advise newer leaders, especially in a role like that, is we need to think about a couple things. We need to think about what are the activities and what are the behaviors that are appropriate for this job, this role. So you as let's say a school principal, and then if you've got administrative assistants, you've got other principals, what are the activities and behaviors that are appropriate for them? And what are the ones that are appropriate for you? I don't see leaders oftentimes being specific enough and granular enough to really saying, what are the 3 to 5 things that only I can do as a leader here? And then what are the 3 to 5 things that my assistant principal can do? And what are the behaviors then that are going to help them be successful? Because then you as a leader can help mold and guide those behaviors if we're all clear on what the activities are. So I really go back to activities and behaviors and really calling those out specifically for each person's role.
Man, that's such a huge piece right there. Just getting down to that level. And I think that's a really, really powerful statement. Focusing on what it is that only you as the leader can do. Certainly there are things that as the leader, you can do what others can do. But what are the things that only you can do? And I want to circle back then to something you had said in your previous response about, when the fire comes, staying focused on those 3, 4, 5 priorities. To me, the very best leaders are the ones who stay focused on those priorities, but can also still be able to handle that fire or be able to delegate that fire or know who's going to manage that fire, but also still oversee while they keep their eye on the horizon on those big pieces. What are a couple of things that maybe you've seen leaders do or that you support leaders with to really just stay dialed in on those priorities?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in keeping things simple and practical. So one tool I developed, and any of you out there can use it. It's simple. I'll describe it, but it's called an activity tracker. So in the left hand column, so the left column, you're going to title it activity, and then under that, during the week, you're going to record the activities that you're involved in. So to your point, Darrin, some of them might be fires, some of them might be your priorities, some of them might be administrative things that you have to do. So in that left column, you're going to put all of the activities that you're doing. Then in the next column, you're going to put importance. Okay, so second column is importance, and you're going to put either low, medium, or high. So again, when we start thinking about some of the activities, now we start labeling low importance, medium, or high. That gives us an idea of which ones we should really be focusing time on and which maybe aren't as important. So then that next column is going to be responsibility. So who's responsible for that activity? Is it yourself? Is it your assistant principal? Is it somebody on the faculty? Who would be responsible? Let's put a name in there. And then the next column over, we're going to put delegate. So we want to put, is this something that we're going to delegate in the future? Or is this something that we're going to continue to do? And what I'd recommend is if you do this once a month, let's say for a week, you categorize your activities, you put the importance and delegation and so forth. Now what we're doing is we're actually getting better. We're getting more effective as a leader because we're starting to see patterns. So we're starting to see what are the fires that come up as an activity. Are they important? And if they're important, then certainly somebody needs to deal with it. Who is responsible? Is it you? Is it someone else? And what this does then in the last column, you can put future. And so in the future, what are your notes there? Do you want to start delegating this? Do you want to take more responsibility? So as the leader, what are your future steps with regards to that activity? So again, very simple activity tracker, something I use and something I use to support other leaders, just to help them start to get a little bit better at delegating and then taking responsibility when appropriate.
I think this is certainly a leading question now, and it ties into a couple of things we've already talked about, and I think one that we'll go a little bit more forward with. But the newer leader or the leader who maybe struggles to be strategic might say, "Well, Rich, that sounds great, but when am I going to have time for that? How do I make time?" Because right now I'm running around dealing with this and this and this and this. You don't understand what I have to deal with. How do leaders take control of their time so that they can do this, so they can spend time up on the balcony, so they can spend time checking in on those who they're not only delegating to, but who they're entrusting to do their jobs?
Yeah, so I think everybody out there is familiar with LinkedIn, the online platform. A lot of folks use that for resumes and job profiles and things. So their CEO, Jeff Weiner, was quoted as saying, "The key of time management is carving out time to think as opposed to constantly reacting." He said, if you're constantly reacting, then you're never going to really be the leader that you can be. And I think that's an important piece. And he talks about carving out time. So I recommend to all the leaders that I coach is you've got to carve out time in your calendar. I know you're busy, but again, activity for activity's sake is never going to be the real solution to be an effective leader. So we have to carve out time in our calendar. So that might be 30 minutes before school starts. It might be 2 hours on the weekend, but we've got to carve time out. If we don't carve time out, then all of the time just naturally fills with other ideas, other experiences, other activities that we can do. So you've got to carve time out. And then when you carve time out, you really want to think about two things. You want to think about what are my priorities? And then how well am I preparing my people to handle those priorities. Because again, as a leader, we shouldn't be doing everyone's job. We should be preparing people to do their work. So that's really the two things I'd recommend is number one, you've got to carve out time in your calendar. And number two, keep a list of your priorities and then the things that you're doing to prepare people to accomplish those priorities. I think if we do that, then that's going to at least give us a foundation to be as successful as we can be there.
I love that so much. I know as an early career leader, my number one struggle, maybe it's not fair to call it number one because there were probably 3 or 4 vying for the top spot every day, but time management was right at the core of that. And being able to carve time out. I love how you talked about it. I've talked about it a ton of times here on the podcast. So folks, yeah, it's not just me who tells you put it on your calendar, right? I mean, the more you can lean into that calendar, I have to do that. If I don't put stuff on my calendar, even today, odds of it getting done go down probably by a factor of 100. If it's on the calendar, it's going to get done. That's just kind of the way that is. You mentioned administrative assistants earlier, and so I have some pieces that I love to support leaders with, but I want to get your take on this too, specific to that time management piece, to some of the delegating of authority and tasks, activities as you've talked about them. What are some things that leaders might consider when it comes to working with their administrative assistant, their secretary, whatever term they may have for that person who really is the gatekeeper? What are some strategies you might have, especially for our early career leaders, maybe those who are just getting ready to launch into their first principalship or something like that here in the fall? What should they do to lean into that administrative assistant?
Yeah, well, one thing that's popular I've seen be effective is the time assessment. So have your administrative assistant categorize all of the areas that you spent time for a given week. So it might be staff meetings, it might be email, whatever it might be. So have them categorize what were the different areas, and then have them actually total up the time. So you might have to share with them, I spent 50 minutes here, I've spent an hour doing this email, but work with them in conjunction to categorize where you spent your time, to total up the hours, and then importantly, graph that out. So on the bottom, the x-axis, we've got the areas that you spent your time that week. And then on the y-axis, the vertical axis, we have the amount of time, the hours. And when you graph that out, typically about 50% of the folks that I work with are genuinely shocked at where they're spending their time, especially then that next step when you overlay your priorities on where you're spending your time. And if you've got things that are taking up a lot of time that are not priorities, to your point, Darrin, you brought up a great point a few minutes ago. A lot of people say time is their biggest challenge. It's the biggest struggle. Well, if that's the case, then we don't want to just carve out time to add time to think strategically and plan and work on our leadership, but we also want to take things away. We got to take stuff off of our plate. So I'm a big believer then. So once we've done that time assessment, now I get into the scoring phase. So then spend a week on a scale of 0 to 3. 0 is no value, 3 is high value. Start scoring your interactions, your meetings, the time that you're spending in different areas. And if we do that, then at the end of that week, your administrative assistant can say, look, this meeting scored an average of 1.2 out of 3. That's pretty low. So we may want to think about eliminating that meeting, changing the meeting, maybe shortening that meeting, but we want to find ways to get time back on our calendar. So I think that's something a lot of leaders, especially newer leaders, don't do, is they don't look for opportunities to gain time back on their calendar by eliminating low value things, or to the comments that we talked about earlier, to delegating more things so they've got more time to be at that strategic level.
Yeah, oh man, that is just so good. And I want to stay on the newer leader challenge right now. As this episode is releasing, we're kind of at that point where those who are stepping into a new leadership role, maybe again they're becoming a principal for the first time or becoming a superintendent for the first time. Maybe it's folks who are out in other areas of leadership. It's not just school leaders listening to this podcast, but maybe they're just starting into a new role where they're leading a team or something along those lines. What I want to do while we have you here, Rich, is let's tap into some of that strategic thinking. So what might be something if I'm a brand new leader, I'm getting ready to launch into my leadership career, what are a couple of steps that I should take or a couple of things I should be thinking about to allow myself to be a strategic thinker as much as possible from the very beginning?
Yeah, that's a key piece. I love the way you phrase that from the very beginning, because sometimes as a new leader, we've got a golden opportunity to make real changes and make real differences. But sometimes we overlook that, just trying to leap right in and get on with the job at hand. So one thing I'd recommend is take the first 30 days and really adopt an explorer's mindset. So what we mean by explorer's mindset is really have a high level of curiosity. And I would really recommend 2 or 3 questions. So as you meet with people in your new leadership role, and even if you've worked at the school before or in the district before, because you've got a new role, it gives you carte blanche to ask some questions again as the new leader. And I would ask, what do you love that we're doing in the school or in the district that you think we should continue to do? What are a couple things that you think this might be a good opportunities to stop doing or do less of? And what would you like to do that we haven't done before? So those 3 questions can be a powerful way for you as a new leader to tap into the thinking and the ideas of some very seasoned people potentially and people with great experiences. I think too often as a new leader, we think we have to have all the answers. That's why we got promoted into this job, right? We're the new leader, so we have to have all the answers. But I think, Darrin, with from your expertise and your leadership work, that the best leaders really are the ones who are able to harness and to stimulate their people's best thinking, and then use that to guide them. So I would say that's one thing, is really take time that first 30 to 60 days to ask those 3 questions. What are we doing well that we should keep doing? What should we stop doing or do less of? And what would you like to do that we haven't done before? I think, that's a really powerful thing to do. And then the other thing I think is important is to create some goals, not just for the school or for the district, but for yourself. So and I like to break it down into quarterly, especially early on. So first 90 days, second 90 days, what are your top 3 goals? It might be to build relationships with people that you don't know. It might be to talk to some faculty about some new areas of curriculum that you're going to develop. But what are 2 or 3 goals in 90-minute increments or 90-day increments? Because if we just look at a year-long goal, then sometimes we don't really have the milestones and the steps to keep it fresh, and we lose the motivation and energy for that. So think about what would be my 90-day goals in this new role to be a better leader in the short term.
I love that. I think we do that way too often, and I'll speak on behalf of all school leaders for all time. When we set a goal for a year, we get rolling in August, and sometime in April or May, we're sitting down with our superintendent, for an evaluation, and we're like, oh yeah, just, we just didn't get there, and it's,
Right.
The job gets in the way. So I love, looking at it in 90-day increments, because it's a little bit more realistic. It's something that maybe you're taking smaller chunks because you're looking at it just for 90 days. And certainly, having that come in, really be a good observer, be an explorer, as you described. I love that. You basically outlined one of my favorite protocols, the start, stop, and continue. I think that is just such an important thing for leaders to dive into. Brand new leader, veteran leader, if you haven't done a start, stop, continue recently, you need to stop and you need to start doing a start, stop, continue. You just really, really do. So let's do this. I mean, I've kind of moved us into that groove around new leaders, which is great. And again, when this is coming out, a whole lot of new leaders will be listening to this. But there's a lot of veteran leaders too that they've been at it for a long time. They're really, really good at it, but maybe they get stuck in a bit of a groove. And I know your book Strategic is a fantastic book. What might be something in there, or just that's swimming in your brain right now for maybe the more seasoned veteran in the leadership space that could help, I don't know, re-energize them?
Yeah. So, one of the things I think is interesting is to revisit our leadership philosophy. And I know oftentimes a new leader will create their leadership philosophy. And I think of a couple different things. I think about, what are my values as a leader? So the 3 to 5 traits that I believe in, as one of the things that I want to do as a leader. So what's the values that we have? I like identity statements. So if I had to describe myself in one sentence, how would I describe my best self as a leader? I think that's always powerful. And then the other thing I think sometimes we don't take time to think about is, what's our end game? What's the legacy that you want to leave as a leader? So for you more experienced leaders out there, let's say you have 5 years left, 10 years left, maybe 12, 15 years left. What's your end game? What do you want people to remember you by as a leader? And again, we need to think about the unique strengths, the capabilities that we have, that we're bringing to the table. So we want to bring our authenticity into that thought process. So I do think for experienced leaders, revisiting your leadership philosophy can be a very powerful way to think about values, your identity statement, and then the legacy that you want to leave. So I think that's one key piece. And the other one, I guess, that I would mention is, as an experienced leader, is what is your vision for the school, for the district? But when I say that, I'm thinking about 10, 15 years out. And again, I know we talked about it's important to have that quarterly understanding of our goals, but then I want you to think more innovatively, 10, 15 years. How can you impact the trajectory of this school, of this district, in a different way, so that when you leave, you've really set your mark, you've really served the people that you're serving to the best of your ability? So now we're really asking you to be aspirational, to think way outside the box. How can you innovate? How can you do things differently so that you really leave a valuable mark on the folks that you're working with? So that would be the other, I guess, thing I would share with the experienced leaders out there.
That gets you fired up. I can absolutely tell on that one. A little bit of passion coming out on that one. Really, really good stuff. So, man, we could just keep rolling on this. We really could, but we've reached that point in the show that I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody here on the show. So, Rich, this is the Leaning into Leadership podcast. So you've given us a whole lot, but what might be another way that you're leaning into leadership right now?
So the other way I'm leading into leadership is I'm doing a mental workout. And I've got to be honest, I stole this from the world of sports. And you look at Olympic athletes and pro athletes, they have this mental workout they go through before their performance. So it's writing down, who do I want to be today? So if you're an athlete, I want to be the fastest. I want to be the fastest skater on the ice. I want to be the fastest sprinter on the track. The best pole vaulter. And then we want to think about visualization. So actually, from a leadership perspective, what I do is I try to envision the meetings I have coming up that day. I think about who the people I'm going to be with. I think about some of the questions I might ask them. I think about some of the objections I might get. And I think about how I might handle some of those objections. And I think about, at the end of the day, what do I really want to see myself accomplishing for that day? So I spend a couple minutes with my eyes closed, thinking through my day, picturing myself in those settings, just like an athlete would do before an Olympic competition, picturing themselves running through their routine if they're a gymnast and so forth. And then the last part of that is really my performance statement. So what I try and do is give myself 1 or 2 statements. Usually it's for the week, and I read it each morning. And I say, today I'm going to be a listener who pauses for 2 seconds after the other person's comments to really soak in what they had to say. That might be one performance statement. Another one might be, I'm going to lead with empathy and put myself in the other person's shoes before I judge what they're saying. So those might be 2 performance statements. So each week I'll try and write down a couple of those. And in the morning, I'll spend, like I said, 5 minutes on this mental workout. And I found that that's a good way for me to lean into being a leader and trying to practice kind of what we're preaching.
That is just super outstanding stuff right there, man. I really, really appreciate that answer. So people are going to want to get in touch with you. They're going to want to follow you. They're going to want to get a copy of the book. How do people get in touch with Rich Horwath?
Yeah, so thanks, Darrin. So I'm a big believer. We've got to share value before we get value. So I've got a lot of free articles and videos and things, templates on my website, which is strategyskills.com. So strategyskills.com, lots of free resources there, assessments, free assessments and things like that too. So feel free to stop by there, and you can also find out information on the book Strategic as well.
Outstanding. We'll make sure that is linked down there in the show notes for you folks. Rich Horwath, thank you so much for joining me here on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast.
Darrin, thanks. It was an honor to be with you today. Appreciate it.
Once again, I really appreciate Rich joining me here on Leaning Into Leadership. Such a wonderful conversation and just so many gold nuggets about how we as leaders can be very strategic and be very intentional about the work that we do. Make sure you go and check out his work at strategyskills.com. Everything you need for Rich Horwath is down there in the show notes. So go and check all that stuff out. Now it's time for a pep talk. Earlier this week, I was out on the golf course, and I've kind of gotten back in the swing of this. You see, when I was a high school principal, I used to go and play golf almost every morning in the summer. I'd go out, walk 9 holes, and just honestly do it for the steps. I'm not a very good golfer, and I'm never going to be a very good golfer. That's not what it's about. It's just more about that mental release, about being centered, and about just enjoying some time, watching the sun come up. But this morning I was out playing golf, and honestly, I was playing pretty darn well. And I got to the 8th hole, and the wheels came off. Yeah, that's right. The wheels came off, folks. One bad shot turned into another bad shot, and all of a sudden my round was not looking near as good as it had prior to teeing off on number 8. I stopped and actually shot the pep talk that will release on Monday right off the edge of the green there at number 8, because all I could find myself thinking about as this hole was unraveling was how in leadership we so often will make a mistake or we'll have something that doesn't quite go our way. And that's what we tend to hyper focus on, right? Like we get super hyper fixated on the thing that didn't go well when maybe through the course of the day, 1,000 things went really well. We're just going to really get dialed in on the one thing that didn't go so well. And usually those things don't happen at the end of the day, right? I mean, they happen in the middle of your day. And so for me, here I am on the 8th hole, and I know I still have holes to go in this round. And I can either allow this one setback to like dominate my thinking, or I can choose to remember that prior to that, I was playing pretty well, and I still got more work to do to finish up the round that I'm on. And as I approach the 9th hole, I get to decide, am I going to let that be the anchor that pulls me down? Or am I going to look at that as just a bump in the road, get back to where I was, and just finish up this round with a smile on my face? I think as leaders, it's so easy to just get lost in the things that don't go well. But at the end of your day, or even after something takes place that doesn't go well for you, it's critical that we kind of take that little step back, maybe jump up on the balcony and think about the other things that have gone well. That way we don't let that consume us. We don't let that derail the rest of our day, right? As my good friend Tom Cody likes to say, keep your day. And don't let something that knocks you down take your day away from you. Keep your day. That's what I got for you this week, folks. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. Get out there, folks. Have a road to awesome week.